I am Grady Culhane, the CapeCod.com News Center, and I'm joined today by a special guest who is a local author about to talk to us more about his new novel. Corey, do you mind just introducing yourself for our listeners?
Sure. So I'm Corey Farrenkopf, and my debut novel, Living in Cemeteries, came out this April from Journalstone. I'm also a local librarian, so I'm a staff librarian over at the Eastham Public Library. So my life is just books, 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 books all the time.
All right, that is awesome. Yeah, you're very involved in the local literature scene of Cape Cod. We have a ton of voracious readers across the Cape. So I have tons of questions for you already. Your new novel is Living in Cemeteries. I'm messing it up myself. You'll tell us the official title and make sure that I don't screw it up. Can you give us a quick rundown of what the general synopsis is for people who are interested?
Yeah, so Living in Cemeteries, it's a work of dark fantasy or horror. It's set in a world that's slightly different than our own, where everyone is essentially linked up to one of their ancestors. And if your ancestor was a terrible person, you'll have a horrible fate coming for you. So it's kind of like a big tale of morality. And the way you find out which ancestor you're like connected to is wherever someone's buried, their ghost comes back and just like haunts that area essentially. And people in this world go around asking different questions from their ancestor to be like, Uncle Jimmy, how am I going to die? And then Uncle Jimmy might tell you, or he might not tell you. So the main storyline is about a guy named Dave who is in a committed relationship with his girlfriend and wants to ask her to marry him, but he doesn't know when he's going to die. So he wants to make sure he's going to live a long life so that he doesn't like leave her widowed at a very young age. And the whole thing is the story about him trying to figure out how he's going to die by talking to ghosts in Harwich mostly.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So my understanding is that you took a lot of inspiration from the local area, Cape Cod in general. What came first? Did you have the idea for the story, and then you're like, well, let me take some pieces from where I live, or were you walking around one day and just had a particularly spooky encounter in Harwich, and now here we are? Which order did these things happen in, and can you give a few examples of locations making an appearance?
Yeah, so I used to be one of the guys who mowed the cemeteries in Harwich during like college. So I'd come home during the summer and I would run a lawnmower and a weed whacker through all the cemeteries like 5 days a week. So I think just being in them all the time made me think about it. And I do have a ghost story that like I encountered a ghost one time in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, which is like the main place where the story takes place. So that probably helps a little bit. So yeah, so Mount Pleasant Cemetery is a place that's in it. It takes place in P-Town a bit. There's some Hyannis time in there, and there's kind of like some in between times at other cemeteries around. But it's mostly in Harwich, just because like that's where I grew up, and that's where all the cemeteries I worked in were. So it kind of like made sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really interesting to see kind of like how we've spoken with a few authors who've kind of used some Cape locations and how that it kind of inspires them. However, now I have to know more about this ghost encounter that you just mentioned to me real quick. Can you tell us a little bit of a tale involved there? What was your close encounter?
Yeah. So Mount Pleasant is like is a very long cemetery, but it's very narrow. So you can like clearly see if you're in the middle of it, you can see to the fence on one side and the fence on the other side. And beyond the fence on one side is like a golf course on the other side's houses. So I'm like in the middle of it, and I can see the road, which is like 500 feet in front of me. I can see the two fences, which are probably like 200, 300 feet away from me. And then I can see back into the tree line, which is where some other graves are. And this is all really important for it. So I'm weed whacking. And if you've never weed whacked before, like weed whackers shoot like stones, they shoot sand. And working for the town, you're like, I really need to not like throw rocks at town locals and stuff like that because like I'll lose my job and that's not great. So I'm weed whacking and weed whacking, and then I feel like someone's watching me, and I look up, and there's this elderly lady standing slightly next to me, like 3 feet away, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I've just been pepper spraying you with the sand. I feel terrible, and I like apologized profusely, and she was like staring at me and glowering at me. And so I like walked off 2 steps and I was like, that was strange. And then I looked back up and she was gone. So there was no lady there, and there's no way this lady had like sprinted out of sight in 3 seconds. So that's my ghost story there.
Wow, very a spooky encounter indeed. Very interesting. I can see why you then moved into the genre of horror and various other spooks and frights. So as well, I also wanted to ask, as you're actually one of the first authors that I've been able to chat with personally that's kind of gone into that more like horror-ish sphere. So I kind of wanted to ask a little bit more about like, was that something that you were interested in when you were younger? Did you have other authors that you draw inspiration from? Do you just kind of like what kind of draws you to that inspiration in terms of like wanting to write it, trying to encapsulate that more fear factor?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. Partly like when I was a little kid, I really loved Tim Burton's like Nightmare Before Christmas. Like that was my first favorite movie as like a little child, and that's a super macabre movie. Um, I originally when I started writing, I wrote like literary fiction with like speculative elements or like that was kind of surreal. So it'd be like pretty straightforward literary and some kind of strange magical thing would happen. And the more I was writing, the more I was being like, I want to put more genre stuff in here. I want more genre stuff, and my stuff kind of would always go towards a dark area. So I was just like, I feel like the natural progression is to do like the horror, the dark fantasy. And most of what I'm drawn to reading is in those genres. So I really like Karen Russell and Kelly Link. I really like Laird Barron and Nathan Ballingrud and Jeff Vandermeer. Like Paul Tremblay is a big influence on me. And he's pretty local too, so that's cool. Yeah. Um, so I read it like pretty much exclusively in like science fiction, fantasy, and horror. That's what I'm really into these days. And I'll do some like literary fiction that has genre elements. Um, but yeah, it's just kind of what comes out of me. I don't oftentimes I don't think a whole lot about what I'm writing. I kind of just like let my brain go where it's going, and it always goes to dark places. So that is kind of what I'm stuck with. Like I've tried to write some like happier stories and it just like doesn't feel right. So I've accepted my fate and I just go with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess the best kind of writing is when it's just feeling like it writes itself. So if that's where it takes you, then that's where it takes you. That's very interesting. So as well, you work at the local library. Is that what was that another thing that kind of like you were interested in literature already? Were you a writer before you became a librarian, or being surrounded by so much literature kind of made you go like, you know what? Yeah, I could do this too. Yeah, like where how'd that line go for you?
Yeah, so I mean I was writing way before I was a librarian. I went in college I studied creative writing in addition to English and education. I've got a degree, I've got a master's in education, so I was a teacher for a little while. And that really just like didn't really work out for me. It didn't feel natural. And I kind of stumbled into the library world where I had it's a kind of a long story, but I worked for a while at Brooktree Library as like a part-time circ person while I was also like installing fireplaces and also it's like Ron, go away. I'm in the middle of an interview. Sorry, one of our my coworkers just showed up. Um, so circling back, I worked as a part-time librarian when I moved back to Cape Cod, and then I got a job teaching at Monomoy for a little while, and then that didn't really work out. So then my wife actually found this job because she was working at Wellfleet Public Library at the time and saw the job open. This is actually for Sturgis Library, which is a library I worked at beforehand, which is a very haunted library because it's the oldest building in America housing a library. So I got ghost stories from that. So I kind of had like a really winding path to get to libraries, but like most of my life experience and skills kind of lends itself to library stuff because I do a lot of programming, a lot of outreach, a lot of book talks and book groups around that. So it all just kind of fit really well, and I like having kind of like all the aspects of my life melded together where I'm kind of working, even though I'm not writing at work, I'm still surrounded by books, surrounded by literature, surrounded by people who care about books and want to talk to you about books. So it all just like feeds the creativity.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And as well, so we've been in talks for a while, obviously organizing these interviews. So this is kind of like pulling back the curtain for a little bit. But we couldn't make this work actually for a little while because you were actually away at a horror convention. So you are just full in on all the scares and spooks, and you're good to go. And now you're telling me more about all the other various encounters you've had. I feel like you're the person that I can probably finally ask. I've been wanting to do a video for a while. What are the scariest places on Cape Cod? What are the most haunted destinations across Cape Cape Cod for you over the from Tip Provincetown all the way down to Falmouth, Woods Hole. Hop on the ferry. If you know places on the islands as well, I'd be happy to hear them. What are some of your number one, like top three haunted locations for Cape Cod?
The first thing that comes to mind is the abandoned Air Force Base out in Truro. Uh, I don't know because they've always been in the. I've always heard that they're gonna tear it down and like they cordoned it off a while ago, but like you could kind of get in there. But that area that is like the old staff housing, where it's just like houses that are left over from like the 40s or 50s that have been abandoned, and they're like all the doors are broken off them. There's like spray paint all over everything. So that's pretty creepy. And then the coal burning plant like next to it is also wicked creepy. I'd go with that one. I've never experienced ghosts there, but it is creepy. What else is really scary?
Mhm.
Huh. I mean, so like I was saying, like I experienced lots of ghost stuff at Sturgis Library when I was there.
Mhm.
So, but I don't, only like a couple of them were scary. You kind of got used to it after a
Sure.
while because like I wrote a lot there and I'd be sitting like in the staff room writing my stuff and like a door would open itself in the attic or whatever and it would just go like and you'd be like, "Oh, I got to go close that because the ghost opened it." And you'd go up and close it. But there was like one night where I was closing by myself and I was like shutting all the lights off and I was at the front desk and something sound like slapped the table with like two hands and it made like a really, really loud noise. And there's no one around and like it was right in front of me and I was like, there's no explanation for this. I need to leave. Um, so I mean that one would be up there. Uh, what else is really scary?
Got one more. Got one more third destination for the haunts and spooks. And as it, maybe I shouldn't even say scary because as you're mentioning right now, sometimes it's like, oh, that's just Jerry. It's just part of the nature of these places. It's very interesting.
Um, Man, the only other one that comes to mind is my buddy used to live in his mom redid the old Doneville and Ames next to the Jolly Captain in Yarmouth. And it used to be like a Doneville and Ames. So there was many times we'd be like hanging at his house and you'd feel some kind of like ghostly presence. And he would tell me that at night when he was sleeping, he'd hear like the coffin maker like hammering or sawing stuff. He would see like orbs and whatnot. So I remember like sitting in my buddy's childhood bedroom and just be like, we'd put on some creepy music and just wait for the orbs to show up. And I never saw any, but he would see them. Um, and that's one of the things about Cape is I feel like so many of the houses are wicked old that like a lot of them just feel creepy and weird because like even if they're not haunted, they still when it's windy enough, it creaks and it moans because it's just really old architecture. Um, but and I just noticed they took down the Jolly Captain off of the hotel that it was, or the condos that it was on, and I was like, he's wicked creepy, but he's gone now, so that's very sad.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like we're living in a place where some of the houses are just built for a kind of person that just doesn't exist anymore. That they have different hobbies, they have different interests. So it is very interesting. I'm sure that's probably been part of the reason why you've delved into some of this genre stuff too. Now you mentioned that you've done some other work. Is there some other upcoming events or some kind of other books that have piqued your interest for ideas that are percolating in the mind already, or are you just kind of trying to kind of currently just come down from finishing this one book? And I'm sure the challenges that come with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always writing. I never really stop. That's kind of, I think, the nature of the thing these days is like to be successful in writing, you just have to be constantly churning stuff out. So I have something that's going to get announced in the next month or so for another book coming out, but I can't legally talk about it yet because all the contracts aren't done. So that's exciting. I have like a novelette that's going to be coming out in the future. I've got a couple short stories coming out in the next couple months. I have a new one in the Deadlands. That's a pretty big horror, dark fantasy magazine that's online and you can get like physical copies. I've got something coming out in Weird Horror Magazine in September, so that's another big one. I'm doing a talk at Sturgis Library, the haunted library where I used to work, in July. So that's going to be fun. I should be doing a talk at Falmouth Library in October. Um, and I'm writing another book right now that's set on Monomoy Island, and that's going to be spooky. And I have another book that I finished and my agent has right now, and it's set in Truro at kind of like a cursed wellness retreat. So I've got those. Um, Yeah, I just have stuff going on all the time. It's very chaotic and it's great, but it's all over the place. So my brain is in a million different places all at the same time.
That's awesome, Corey. It's great to hear that you have
But
so
yeah,
many projects.
I would say if people wanted to read the short stories, if you go to coreyfarrenkopf.com, all of my past short stories that I published are there, and whenever new ones come up, they end up over there. Because like most publishing's online these days, so most magazines don't have print runs; they just are published online. So if you wanted to check those out, they are there.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll also have a link to the website down in the description for this video, for this interview. But I can second that right now. The newsletter is king. So also for anybody who's interested in signing up for the CapeCod.com newsletter, my digital team would love it if you were to do that. So here in Corey, we can get more content for you. So as well, when I just want to ask a few last questions are about coming up on time. But in this news book that has come out, what was the biggest challenge for you? Was it coming up with the twist ending? Do you have trouble with dialogue? Was it kind of maybe location setting? What were some of the stuff that was really stumping you? And how did you end up solving it ultimately to get this back out on shelves? I know it's a
That's a good
tough
question.
question.
One of the biggest thing that we had to, when I say we, like my agent and I talked through a lot of stuff, and my wife and I talked through a lot of stuff also. She's my first reader on everything. So one of the things that I struggled with the first draft is the characters. I wanted the characters needed to be like more fully fleshed out. Like their arcs were already set, and that was fine. But the whole like giving them hobbies, what are their likes, what are their dislikes, why would anyone care about this person as opposed to just like a blank slate? So between talking to my wife and talking to my agent, we went back or and basically gave them hobbies, made Dave more into botany, made Jessica more into like CrossFit, physical training and stuff. Made one of the other main characters like a very strange artist. So basically, between my wife reading it and my agent reading it, they were like, "You need to fix these things, make these better." And I was like, "Okay, I'll do my best." And that was a bit of a struggle. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. The more we talk with different authors, it's very interesting to see kind of like where they struggle because it's a passion thing and everybody comes at it from different directions. So it always means it's an interesting story even for the author themselves, trying to finish the arc that is finishing the story. So congratulations, it's awesome that is out now. We will have links in the description for this video. Corey, thank you so much for joining me for this interview. It has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Grady.
I'm Grady Culhane in the CapeCod.com News Center, and thank you for listening.